Hi everybody, it is Stephen here today, and today I want to talk to you about this scientific study that is trending all over the internet, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, that's basically being used to say how gluten sensitivity isn't real and that unless you have celiacs you should continue to consume wheat. And that's either bad science at its worst or good marketing at its best. First, it's not true. It's not. It's not just the gluten uh, in wheat that makes it really bad. In fact, there's other things about wheat that make it a really, really terrible thing to have in your diet. Um, Second, it's also a very small study, and it's specifically targeting irritable bowel syndrome. And it's not addressing, say, something like rheumatoid arthritis, say people who have success eliminating gluten from their diet because they have arthritis. It's only addressing gluten in regards to irritable bowel syndrome, which is very strange how they did it, because what they did is they gave certain groups gluten capsules and they gave other, like the blind studies, they gave others a placebo. But they eliminated all, they put them on a FODMAP diet, a diet that reduces the amount of these very small, very hard to digest carbohydrates in your diet, which get digested by the gut bacteria, and then that's the reason why they think irritable bowel syndrome happens and is made worse. So they eliminated these things from the diet and gave people gluten capsules, saw that nothing happened. But the problem is, if you eat gluten from a whole source, you're going to get these small carbohydrates in your diet because that's one of the things that exists in wheat. And we already knew this. Like, there was a lot of science done behind it. The reason why we tell people who have irritable bowel syndrome to eliminate wheat and to eliminate gluten is not because of the gluten. It's actually, while it may play some smaller role, we don't fully understand it yet. But what we do understand is that there's a carbohydrate in wheat that is very hard for us to digest, and therefore gets digested by the bacteria in our gut and then causes inflammation and all these other problems. If your gut bacteria are off, they can, when they ferment carbohydrates that reach them, some can produce very toxic compounds that are very damaging to you. So when I say that this is bad science, I mean that it's very manipulative to say that people who have IBS can eat all the gluten that they want, because oftentimes gluten and wheat are used interchangeably. And with this study, a lot of the marketing is used interchangeably. Like, people say, "Oh, you can eat wheat all you want if you have IBS." It is because the gluten has no effect. Well, it wasn't the gluten in the first place the reason why people were eliminating wheat from their diet. It had to do with this carbohydrate that, by the way, was eliminated from the diet. So it's very, very frustrating, when you understand, at least on a basic level, the scientific process and how this stuff works, and why this is supposed to be eliminated, and why a study like this is, put it plainly, it's a little ridiculous, and it's very manipulative, and people who haven't had a lot of experience reading scientific studies are going to glance through something like this and be like, whoa, wait a second, like, I can eat wheat and I can eat gluten, like, I can eat this, like, this is fine for me. But it's not, and that's not even what the study is saying, and so it's very manipulative that way. Second thing is, it doesn't address the fact that there's another carbohydrate in wheat that is particularly bad for human beings in general. There's very few exceptions to this, of people who this is acceptable for them. Being very young people with very high metabolisms, playing a lot of sports, particularly endurance sports. It has a carbohydrate content that's very high, but it also has a carbohydrate that's very easily digestible by your saliva. And this means that it spikes your blood sugar. And it spikes your blood sugar more so than a tablespoon of sugar. For example, a slice of bread spikes your blood sugar more than just taking a tablespoon of sugar and downing it. You know how we all know that it's fairly common knowledge that soda is bad for you. And people say, oh, drinking too much soda causes diabetes, all that kind of stuff. Diabetes is bad, etc., etc., etc. Well, guess what? Wheat pretty much is worse. It is. It's a fact. It's worse because of the way it's digested, because of how quickly it's digested by your saliva into the body. And this does various things. It thickens your blood. When it's sugar in your blood, thickens it, which makes it harder for you to transport nutrients. It also will eventually wear out your insulin receptors, causing diabetes. Okay? So there's that fact. So this is nothing to do with the gluten particle at all. But this is one of the major reasons why people choose to go wheat-free. And one of the problems, too, is that wheat-free and gluten-free are oftentimes used interchangeably. Okay, so the next thing is wheat and most grains have kind of serve as anti-nutrients. How can I explain? It's like the shell of the wheat, the bran of the wheat, will actually take nutrients out of your body. It binds to them, it binds to minerals and all that kind of stuff, and will remove them from your body. So, for example, eating whole wheat bread, you're going to remove nutrients from your body. This is one of the reasons why, say, the aristocratic people ate refined grains like white rice and white flours, because it wouldn't remove these from the body. Of course, it has the side effect of making the product even more deadly to your blood sugar, but it doesn't remove things from your body. Okay, moving on. Most wheat that you're going to consume is GMO wheat, and this is bad for two reasons. One, it hasn't been around for 50 years yet, which means it's untested and you're essentially a guinea pig. I don't think I really need to explain why this is bad, but just know that if something, for example, something in a diet or some kind of medication hasn't been around for 50 years, you essentially are a guinea pig, because we don't know, humanity doesn't know, the scientific literature isn't there, the studies aren't there yet to know the real long-term effects of this specific thing over the course of a huge population. We don't. So you are a guinea pig. The second reason why this is bad for you is that wheat was designed to be GMO for the high yield too. It was designed, the stalks were made shorter so that it can yield a greater amount of wheat per acre. But it was also made to be GMO, to be what's called Roundup Ready, which is Monsanto and all that kind of stuff. They create this pesticide called Roundup. And unfortunately, this pesticide is also what's known as an endocrine disruptor, basically a hormone disruptor. So it will play with your hormones, which can make you gain weight excessively, lose weight excessively, destroy your fertility. So congratulations, if you eat too much of this, you can possibly go infertile and never be able to have children. That's a real fact. People go infertile from exposure to this chemical. So if you're eating wheat that isn't organic, it's going to be sprayed with this Roundup, and you're going to get a lot more of it in your diet. So that's a fact. So again, nothing to do with gluten at all. Nothing to do with gluten or gluten sensitivity, but yet a really big reason to avoid wheat. There's also, you should avoid corn for the same reason, except organic corn. What else? Soybean. is the same thing. Pretty much any of the grain crops that are used as fillers have been genetically modified and contain lots of this pesticide, Roundup. The third reason is really interesting actually because wheat, this does have something to do with gluten, um, and is one of the reasons why people choose to avoid it, and this is actually very well understood. Um, the gluten particle causes addiction to that particle in people to a various degree. Um, gluten is a two-part protein, and one of those parts actually crosses your blood-brain barrier. By the way, this is pretty rare in foods to do. It crosses your blood-brain barrier and attaches to opiate receptors in the brain and causes feelings of pleasure. Okay? Which essentially is a physiological addiction. So this is what causes people to overeat. When they eat gluten, they want to overeat because they want more of it. Their pleasure center is being stimulated in the brain because the one part of the gluten molecule is passing the blood-brain barrier and affecting this. And for different people, this has different effects, just like all addictions that are physiological. Certain people are better able to deal with them. Certain people are worse able to deal with them. For example, there's a lot of studies around there about alcoholism and how people become genetically predisposed to alcoholism and how, for example, let's say the Native American population, for some reason, alcoholism tends to run rampant, and it's not just because of the situation that, quite frankly, we as Americans put them in by taking all their land, disposing them, and ruining their culture. There's real physiological reasons for this. So people, for example, myself included, who struggled with their weight, can have phenomenal success by removing gluten because it helps remove one of the addictive substances in food in our diets. Gluten is one of them. Sugar is another big one that is very good to eliminate if you find yourself like once you eat, you can't stop. Denatured casein proteins can also have similar effects for some people. This is why pizza is like a double or triple whammy because there is gluten, which is physiologically addictive to the brain in the crust. In the sauce, frequently a lot of people don't know this, but there's sugar to make it sweeter. And then in the cheese, because the cheese is pasteurized and heated, the protein molecules become denatured. And the science behind this isn't quite figured out yet, so I don't want you folks out there to take my word for this as a fact, but it's thought that these denatured molecules, because of the way that they look and the way that they bend, look very similar to opiates, very similar to things like morphine and heroin. So there's a thought school out there that they work in very much the same way in the brain, and this is why it's so hard to give up cheese, or it's so hard to just eat a little bit of cheese. Like, once you eat it, you're always going to want more. And again, this affects different people differently. So we just covered a few things there, and these are things that are bad about wheat without even addressing the whole gluten sensitivity issue. And we also addressed the fact that the way that this study is being used is in fact inappropriate because it's kind of like, it's in a lot of ways like a nonsensical study. Like, it doesn't make sense to do a study like this. Like, we figured out that the bad part about wheat for IBS is actually this carbohydrate. By the way, this carbohydrate is in lots of other things. For example, you have to avoid onions and garlic if you have IBS. And that's the problem. So eliminating that and just giving people gluten capsules and proving that nothing happens with IBS, like it doesn't get worse or it doesn't get better, and most people report having the nocebo effect or whatever. That means that everybody who was giving it said they had worse symptoms when they were giving either the gluten or the placebo. And it doesn't make sense to do a study like this. It would I'm trying to think of a good example of what this would be like doing a study. It would be like, it would be like doing a study based on, we know maybe mercury poisoning does this, and we know it's mercury poisoning, but instead what we do is we test the glass in the thermometer. And we say, okay, we want to see if this is the glass in the thermometer that's really doing this. And I guess that kind of makes sense to a certain extent to eliminate all variables. But if the science and the studies have really been out there to show that it's these carbohydrate particles, why would we test the gluten? Because we found that it's something in everything else. Anyway, I just want to go over that real quick, and hopefully that clears up some misconceptions, and maybe helps clear up some of the confusion, and basically let you know my stance on it, which is a little confused why somebody would do a study on something that we know so well it is caused by something completely different. So that's my video for today, and hopefully everybody found it a bit informative, and it cleared up maybe some of the confusion involved. I know that when I was first trying to lose the weight, when I was barraged with all this stuff, like, no, eat whole grains, they're really good for you. No, be paleo, like, eliminate all grains. It was very confusing because a lot of times scientific data is presented in a very unscientific way, and that's a big problem. So everybody, I'm glad that if you're living, in the Americas here, summer's here, I'm pretty happy. And make sure to get outside and, kind of get your vitamin D. All right, have a good one.